Folks, I'm going to go ahead and begin now. There's a couple of folks coming in yet, but you can all hear me just fine. If not, get louder, turn my volume up. If you would, just kindly remember to turn your cell phones to silent. I'm extremely honored to be able to do this tonight for Roger and his family and friends and everyone. I'll get into just a little bit more of who I am and my association and time with Roger, but it was pretty precious. Life is too short. Now, if there was a byline for Roger's life, I'd say live it to the fullest. Do things you love. And at times, that meant as fast as possible. If you ever rode in a car with him, particularly when he was towing a glider trailer through downtown Minneapolis, I had a conversation with a guy today who did experience that with him, and he'll never forget it. How about during a low-speed pass in a glider over a grass strip? Frightening people on the ground, or at least wondering, is this guy right? One of the things I want to premise this, my part of this presentation, and this remembrance of Roger Rudolph Brogren. There is no chance of me straying out of bounds when it comes to Roger. He was out there already. So all topics were available for discussion, and if he didn't agree with you, you'd know it. He wouldn't hesitate to tell you. My introduction to Roger came a little bit later than a lot of you people, family and or even CAP friends. It wasn't until 2001. Man, was there some especially noteworthy episodes in the last 20 years. I can remember that summer, us in a tent in Oshkosh, sharing a tent. Well, that's all we shared. The sleeping bags we were on and the air mattresses started floating. We were on a slight slope. You remember that night, John, when it rained so hard, kind of like it did last night, yesterday afternoon? We're in the tent, and all of a sudden the stream comes flowing right through there, and our air mattresses floated all the way to the edge. If the door had been open, who knows where we would have ended up at. My first glider ride was with Roger down over the Mississippi River back in 2003. And this is Roger. His comment in my logbook was, an excellent flight for a neophyte. August of 2003, he and I embarked on a journey which was pretty special. Somehow I had gotten permission to fly I was an employee of the Air Force at the time as the Air Force advisor to Civil Air Patrol. I got permission to fly an airplane from South St. Paul to Las Vegas, where the National Convention was. And I asked Roger if he would go with me. We always like to have safety pilots, and it's really good to have a second person. But 19 and a half hours flying later, didn't take us that long to get to Vegas, but that was the round trip back to South St. Paul. And it was full of sights and imagination and lots of neat stuff. We hardly talked to anybody. We were really free. The airplane performed well. About the only incident that I remember from that trip was we're in a casino in Las Vegas. Now, I think Roger had frequented a few more casinos than me. We're walking around, we roomed together there, and we're walking around, and he goes to the other side of the table or whatever and motions to me. So, okay, I walked directly across. Little did I know I had entered the pit And I was suddenly being apprehended until he came to my rescue. You weren't supposed to be in there. Maybe the only other danger that came about was when we were circling over Arches National Park on the way home. But that went all right too. It wasn't really a low pass anyway. It was just sightseeing. Roger told me later on that this was one of the highlights of his flying career, this trip, because it was pretty special for me. I'd been on lots of long trips, but with many engines. One engine made it especially exciting and gratifying as well. I had a couple more glider rides, and both of them were with Roger. One where he gave me the aero machine and said, "Okay, do what you want." So I did a loop. And as I finished up, he said, "We're not supposed to be doing loops in these." But I did it. The next time was towing an airplane from South St. Paul down to Mankato. And it was a day when, similar to some that have happened this week, where there's a strong wind out of the south. So we're heading down I-35 or thereabouts, and we're watching the cars behind or pass us as they're heading south because it took so long. It took almost basically an hour and a half to fly to Mankato, which would have ordinarily been half of that amount of time. I think he was happy to have me along because this is a little bit later in his flying career anyway. Roger was an extremely confident and, I might say, competent individual. The breadth of his expertise was pretty wide. If he really wasn't sure of some situation, he was always willing to give it a try anyway. Coming from Sweden at age 27, I'm sure he found this nation wide open for growth, potential for him, and a good life. His passionate approach to living meant someone with his work ethic and talents would succeed. There were some bumps along the way, as there is for everyone. That's life. I wished I'd known him earlier. And as I mentioned, there is going to be an open mic time frame later. For some of you that have got some earlier episodes from the 60s, 70s, we've got something coming up from a longtime member too. You know, he was a man of the world. You remember that windbreaker? I love that windbreaker. I used to point to it and say, "Roger, have you been here?" He and I, both world travelers, we would compare notes. I'd never been to Singapore. He had. I'd been to Zanzibar. I'd been to Nepal. I'd been to Iran. I'd been to Paraguay. You know, and it was on and on and on comparisons of that sort. But he always had some stories to tell about each and every episode of where he was. So that was something special. I can imagine how proud and happy he was to gain his U.S. citizenship. One of his gifts to me was a pocket-sized copy of the U.S. Constitution. He was a patriot in the end who probably had some very old-fashioned ideas about the U.S. flag. There was one picture that popped up earlier of him holding it, and it did mean a lot to him. The efforts to get here, to succeed, gaining citizenship and all that. It's old-fashioned. Anyway, he knew that this was a great nation to live in, and that foundation document that he passed on to me, that Constitution, was not just some outdated piece of paper. I think the glider that he's flying around in right now has lost his canopy. Now, either he was inside the cockpit pounding and yelling and screaming and it came off, or he just removed it, threw it away, and he's going to jump out. And anyone on his email distribution list will know just what effort and where he's going to put his attention when he gets back. There's always one other possibility. I want you to think of that as we listen to High Flight. This is a poem that was written early 40s during World War II by John Gillespie McGee. He was 19 years old. He was a Canadian that was serving in the RAF at the time. It's become kind of a symbol of airmen and flight throughout the world. For a lot of us, it's very meaningful. Thank you. I'll be back.
All right. High Flight by John Gillespie McGee, Jr. Oh, I have slipped the surly bones of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward, I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of, or wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through the footless halls of air. Up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the wind-swept heights with easy grace, where never lark or ever eagle flown. And while the silence lifting my mind, I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the basic element.
Thank you so much. We do now have a video which one longtime member of Rogers, Jim Wales, sent to us, and through the modern apparatuses and technology, we're going to be able to play his words to you.
Good evening. Sorry I can't be with you today to celebrate Roger, but unfortunately due to family circumstances, I was unable to attend, but to the kindness of Kim and Nick, I am trying right now to record a video that you will have to suffer for you can see. Anyway, it's a sad day for me, for my family, and all of his friends. But this is not about sadness, it's about celebration. So to give you a little background between Roger and I. Back in the early 70s, Roger visited UK. I was working for 3M UK, and that's when we met. And at that time, neither of us knew that we would spend almost 50 years driving each other nuts. But we were smart most of the time. And the good thing was that he was always there for me. He mentored me, and without his support, I probably would be doing something much less than I ever did. The other side of that is that Roger always liked to give you lessons, and he was able to give me lessons because, first of all, he supported, along with Clyde, my move to Brussels, which I really appreciated. It was a really big honor to do that. And then eventually to Minnesota, which unfortunately Roger is never going to be forgiven for because that winter was absolutely miserable. But that apart, he will always give you experiences, his knowledge, and I'll give you just a couple of them. First appointment that I got working for him was to fly 800 miles northeast of Moscow to China on the Canals River to go find equipment that had been shipped there under snow. So there I was, woolly hat, gloves, and everything else. When I got back, I talked to him because they take your passport and you don't get to leave. This was back in the Iron Curtain days. Roger said, yes, but that's good experience. That'll hold you in good stead. And I said, well, I'll tell you one thing I won't be doing is going back. I never did. He was very good about that kind of thing. The second one was also, part of my patch was the Middle East. And I was going to make my first trip to Lebanon. So Roger, being Roger, gives you advice. So he said, did you book the Holiday Inn in Beirut? I said, I did. He said, good. He said, now you have to stay above the 8th floor of the hotel. And I asked, why? He said, well, because the M50 machine gun can only go to the 7th floor. He probably had experienced this himself. So that was the second lesson he gave me very early on in my career. Ones that I passed on to others, but You know, it's something worth doing. You have to do the bad jobs before you get the good jobs. Then you get down to Roger entertaining you when you're a visitor in the Twin Cities. And he was very good at that too. So I was over here just before Christmas one year. And I was actually out at his house. And he said, oh, we've got to go and get the Christmas tree. And anyone who's been to his house knows that those Christmas trees were rather large. And he had this old Jeep. And this old Jeep, he and I traveled up a dirt road to the Christmas tree. And there it was. We put up the back of the Jeep, tied it down. He said, how about some fun? Let's go through the woods back. Not down the road, through the woods. But I said to him, didn't you tell me that the Jeep didn't have brakes? And he said, you don't need brakes. You don't need brakes. So we're dodging trees, we're running through the snow, it's cold and everything else. I'm thinking of my last hours on Earth. And then suddenly we came to a halt. It's only because we ran into a snowdrift. But we did get the tree down there. He said, see, we don't need brakes. The last one was his introduction to gliding. Now, Roger loved gliding. He liked being a pilot, but he loved gliding in particular. And again, on a business trip on a nice sunny day, we went out to, I think it's in Point Bear, but it's close by. But we are now going to go, and he's going to show me White Bear from the sky. So off we go in the glider. It was a gorgeous day, and we were flying around. And he's a very accomplished pilot. So I was very happy to be there, except on the way back. As we were flying in, there was some wind, a little buffeting, and he went, and we were very close to the high power lines, which was right by this field. And I said, Roger, do you see those power lines? He said, oh, they're always there. You don't have to worry about them. And he did land the plane very safely. And I learned very quickly never to doubt his abilities because he wouldn't put anyone in danger. So there's just a couple of little stories that I will share with you instead of using up the whole hour to tell you all the others. Having worked for him and with him over the years, I got to see how he supported employees. And the partners often taking the heat to stop the trouble for other people. Always backing them up, making sure that they did not suffer from not a mistake, but just maybe a miscalculation. And he was always there for people. He was there for people and for their families all the way through. So it was unwavering in his doubt, his undoubted unwavering of support and compassion for people, which I really enjoyed, as did my family. His commitment to people wasn't limited to the employees or the people he worked with, but it was also to their families. If they were needed, if they needed something, Roger was always there first before anyone else. And my family have found it incredible, the stuff that he did, both with our move to the United States and all those years later. And so it's kind of unlikely that we would have been settled the way we were if it hadn't been for him. So after that, the old brother decided to leave right in the middle of COVID, which means we never had the lunch, we never had breakfast. But it's the way he was. It's the way he's always been. When it's his time to go, he goes. So rest in peace.
You know, from that you get the idea that Roger was really so much more than any one of us could have actually totally appreciated or known. I think that's something else. So many years, so many people all over the world. We're going to have a Bible reading now. Gina, if you would.
Ecclesiastes 3:1-8. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to cast away. A time to tear, and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace.
I heard a little story this week that back in the Middle Ages, when they came out of the time of the plague, people busted loose, coming out of every major war that has happened in various parts of the world. World War I. What do we have? A roaring 20s, World War II. Lots of celebrations after that horrific event as well. I don't know, does this past year qualify for unimaginably uncomfortable, annoying, unpleasant, unnecessary? All of those things. I think Roger would be one that would be ready to lead us in a celebration once we finally reach that point where we can say, okay, that's behind us. And I wouldn't miss him, that's for sure, but think of him during that. We do have a video that's coming up, and it's to Amazing Grace. I haven't seen it, so I'm not sure. Pictures and the whole business of the man himself. next thing that we want to do is to get a few words from any of you who have some personal experiences, things you'd like to share. No retribution. Yeah, I'm going to bring the microphone around, and my trusty sanitizer here. You know, how many times have any of you been anywhere in the past 9 months? This many people. This is a happening, right? It's nice. Just raise your hand if you've got anything. I know John's got something back there. John was the tow pilot for Roger on hundreds, and literally hundreds of flights on Mankato, Red Wing, just about everywhere where they were done. So there's a couple that he would like to remember. You can come next. We'll come back to you and see if anyone else. Yes.
I met Roger in 1974. He hired me for an international tech service job. And met Jim up there, and this Jim, and we're part of the lunch crowd, 3M lunch crowd, at least from our old division. That was microphone products. So anyway, so I got hired for this job in late '74. And Roger set up a trip for me, a 4-week trip to Africa for my first trip out of the country. Up to that point, the only foreign country I've been to was Wisconsin. Anyway, so he sends me to French-speaking Africa. So I go to Abidjan, Ivory Coast. I had trouble getting through customs and immigration and everything. You know, we spoke English there. But they appreciated a U.S. passport. Anyway, the place, Ivory Coast, was great. Accra, Ghana, not so good. But again, French speaking. But I had an Englishman in line behind me who spoke French, and he kind of interpreted for me. And then I went to a former British colony called Lagos, Nigeria. And that was not my cup of tea. But I didn't get the trip. Then the last country I went to was Kenya, which was beautiful. So that's scary, making noises. So anyway, Roger got a big kick out of it. And I came back and told him about how tough it was in those French-speaking countries in Africa. And he just laughed. He said, "Welcome to the big leagues." That's about it. But that's the type of person who I feel would, as far as I'm concerned, he wouldn't put you in a position where you were going to fail. Thank you.
Thank you. Civil Air Patrol representation, someone here for sure.
Okay, thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dave Yost, and I knew Roger through the Civil Air Patrol. And unlike some of the other folks, I was a relatively newcomer to meeting Roger. I first met Roger when I joined the CAP in 2004, and I'd go to squadron meetings once a week, and Roger would be holding forth and sharing his opinions. He had enough opinions that he was willing to share them with others, and we always appreciated that. And I would hear from other pilots what a challenge Roger could be to fly with sometimes. I only flew with him once, and one of the pieces of advice I got was never leave Roger alone with the airplane before you get in, because he'll put a piece of tape over some little duct, or he'll mess with you somehow to see if you found it. In fact, when I look at the tail on a pre-flight, I can still see the little crack in one piece of the, for pilots, the horizontal stabilizer, that had a crack that I didn't notice, and every time I go around that on any plane, I can hear Roger saying, "Well, well, I guess you did a poor pre-flight. But I found out the trick to flying with Roger and to reduce his spiciness was you wait until he's just getting over the flu. I flew with him just once in December 2005. It was my check flight for what they call mission pilot. For you CAP folks, this is my initial 491. And you have to do steep bank turns as part of the check ride, or at least you did at the time. And the first thing you do is you kind of fly back and forth a little bit to look around and make sure that there's no other airplanes out there that you have to worry about. And I was doing that, and Roger goes, well, that doesn't look very steep to me. And I said, no, I'm not doing it yet. Oh, okay, go ahead. So we got the maneuvers done, and he says, okay, now, let's see you find Benson's Airport. And that was the little airport in White Bear that the gentleman on the video was referring to. Let's see you find that. Well, I hadn't told Roger that I live 2 miles north of that. So I just started flying toward it, and he goes, how'd you do that? And I said, well, there's the lake, there's the water tower, there's my house. He goes, let's go back to Lake Elmo. I think I spoiled his fun. But I always appreciated the way Roger would be there for you with plenty of advice. We were sitting at the hangar one Saturday during an exercise, and I was trying to qualify on some other Civil Air Patrol qualification, and I needed his help. And I said, Roger, could you walk me through some of this? And he just looks at me and says, it would be my pleasure. And he taught me a bunch of stuff in the next hour. So I will always appreciate what he did for me personally and what he's done for the Civil Air Patrol and the Boy Scouts, and obviously pretty much everybody else he encountered. So, Roger, best of luck going forward, I guess.
Thank you, David. There's people,
Brad. I'll talk, I guess.
Brad?
This might get some of us thrown in jail, so
Well, some of us have been in jail.
It is true.
Well, Roger and I had kind of a strange relationship, I guess, because, we could trade insults pretty well and at the same time respect each other. So I was on the glider line. And Bill, you were involved with that too. I'll come up here so you
Yeah,
can
I
see.
want people to be able to see.
So, some of this is animated. So anyway, I'm in charge of safety. And Roger's one of the instructors. And he does a ground maneuver that I'm not especially impressed with. So he just and stops it, and the nose comes up like this, and so I come marching at him like this, and he stands up in the glider. Don't you tell me what to do! And so, oh, okay, fine. So we're kind of having a day at work. And the weird thing is then John's our co-pilot. He did something that I also took some exception to. So I go marching up to the John, and he squares off like the giant he is. I didn't even bother. I just said. So anyway, we're having a bad day at work. Then I do something to make you mad. And now we're both going like this. Well, at the end of the day, we're sitting on the grassy knoll. Both Roger and I having a wine cooler together and laughing. And it's like, well, people are coming up. How can you guys be at each other all day and then sitting here like this? So it was really strange. But then came somebody, I don't know, we had been drinking wine coolers. And again, we're not going to jail for this now. Hey, it's time to fuel the vans. I said, Roger, I ain't driving. He called me a name and said, get in the truck. And that's my story. That's how Roger operated, and it was great.
I had a call from a guy on I-75 heading up from the Detroit area toward northern Michigan, UP. And he had some aspects of his stories and experiences with Roger in the late 90s, early 2000s were similar. Really thought a lot of him. Hey, someone else, anyone else? John, you want to talk about it at all?
Sure.
This is the guy that was probably closest to him for the last 20 years operationally in many aspects.
Roger and I started in the glider world. Bill, what year is that? 1999, I think, is when we got that thing. Roger and I unpacked it out of an ocean-going container and worked with the FAA, got the U.S. Certificate of Airworthiness. So hundreds of flights. Everyone was an experience. 5,000 toes, the only actual emergency I had was with Roger. And everything was fine because you trained for it. And we both did exactly what we're supposed to do, everything's cool. But Bill back here, who might remember this, he was, I don't know if you had just got your glider license or you were training with Raj. We're down at Red Wing, and Raj always would tell me when he's with a student, when you get up, I want you to do this, this, and this, but we're not going to talk. And we're going to see what the student's going to do, or the person he's giving a check ride to. So, you remember the steep turns? We're not supposed to exceed 30 degrees of bank with a glider on tow. And we were at 45, 50, 60 degrees. And Bill back here is trying to hang on to the glider, and Roger's laughing on the mic because I'm basically playing crack the whip with this thing. But everything was, I'll just say Roger like pushed the envelopes, but we did it in a fun way, in a safe way, and everybody always learned. One other thing that some of you might appreciate, Brad brought up the fact that you decompress after you fly. So, we were known to do that. And I'll never forget one night down in Mankato. We were decompressing. Now it's time to go back to the dorm and play by the rules for the next morning. Raj decides to take a shortcut. And I don't know if you were there, Bill, you might have been. But Bill's back here laughing. Raj decided instead of taking the roads back to the dorm, we're going to take the sidewalks through campus. And we got pulled over, needless to say. Raj looks at me and winks. He goes, I got this. He gets out of the vehicle and he just starts rattling 100 miles an hour in Swedish. What could the cop do? He just threw his arms up. And Nick's laughing. It was classic. And, I just leaned forward and told the cop, I said, don't worry about it, I'll get him put to bed. So, always fun with Raj. And just a pleasure to fly with. And I believe I don't know, Bill, but I think he's the only one that gave my late wife a glider ride. So, very, very nice.
Thank you, John.
Sure.
This is fun, isn't it?
Hi, my name's Carl Brogren. I'm probably now the senior Brogren in the room here, but I've known Roger since not long after he moved here from Sweden. We moved to Minnesota in 1959 in the North St. Paul, and when Roger, I don't know if it was his first house, but it had to be pretty close to it. He ended up moving maybe a quarter mile away from us in North St. Paul. I think his roommate was Sven, but I'm not sure. But Roger was always the family. We looked at him as kind of the playboy adventurer, or whatever you want to, however you'd like to characterize it. But he would intermittently and usually unannounced come over and knock on the door and see how things are going and come in. And if you know Roger, you just put a nickel in him and sit back and listen. And he was just always a fun part of the family. I know back in the 60s he was into ice racing. I think it was a Morris Minor that he would race. They'd have an ice race on Lake Phelan as part of the Winter Carnival. And I do remember I was very impressed with his fire engine red XKE Jaguar that he drove over to our house one time and took us for rides, and that was a lot of fun. And Roger was also very proud of the Swedish family and the Swedish heritage, and he was working very hard trying to get us back for a family reunion. We went there in '99 for one, and we were supposed to go last summer, but obviously with COVID it didn't work out. But as involved as he was in the family tree and reunions and things. I remember once just referring to Roger as one of the Swedes, and he says, "No, I'm one of the Americans." He had left that behind. That was his heritage, but he was an American, and he wanted to make sure that I realized that, and it was just always stuck with me that he took the time to make that distinction, and I always enjoyed our visits with Roger because it was just always such a treat to kind of get caught up on where we've come from and what he was doing, and we'll certainly miss him, but certainly cherish all the times we had with him.
While I'm walking over, yeah, there's this lady here would like to go first, okay? I saw her hand first. I was going to say that exploring the boundaries was something I mentioned earlier. Did Roger have limits? I doubt it. Maybe one or two here and there, but we can explore those. But if you don't know your limits or try to explore them, then you're living a narrow life. He didn't.
Hello. Some of us are here from the 3M Sports Car Club, and we've known Roger since the mid-60s. Is that about right? And he was always pedal to the metal, full out, no holds barred, just blazing down the track, no matter if it was on ice or a gymkhana or a road race, whatever. He and Jim Whalen formed a racing team, and those two were just happy. They were happy about everything they did. And it was always fun to be around him. He was a friend to everybody. And gosh, we just saw him last summer, and it's just like we haven't ever been apart, and I think we had not seen him for maybe 4 or 5 years. It's just like when you made a friend with Roger, you were always a friend. He was always there. Somebody else?
I'm not pretty good, Bob. I've known you too long. I've known Julie and John sitting here, the Spricks, and if there was a time if we could smell the food at the Spricks. So, Mr. Whitman and Roger, and this fella here, and this is Jim Whalen's brother, and we'd all run over to her house and we'd eat till we burst because everything was so good. But I've known Roger. I got out of service in 1964, 63, and that's when I met Roger. He's been like that ever since. He was at my 50th wedding anniversary along with the sweet wife. And like she said, there's the bottom line. When you met Roger, you loved Roger. And he was always your friend. You knew where you were coming from. He didn't lie to you. If it was that way and you didn't like it, well, he'd change you. But other than that, what's your name? Nicholas? Nicholas and my son were born the same year. I haven't seen Nicholas since. And there's that good looking, you got all the traits of Roger?
No, he got it from me.
Is that good, bad, or indifferent? It's good. Well, if you got traits from Roger, I think everybody in this room would say, hey, you're doing all right. But I tried to call you Nicholas, and that didn't work. Your mom jumped on that with both feet. That's Nicholas. Well, then my Todd came along, and it was Todd and Nicholas. Then next thing I hear is your dad saying, well, and Nick and I went out to do this and did that, and I'm over that because I could never remember Nicholas. Great. Good to meet you. Who's the next one that's gonna catch the axe? Write that down, I got yours.
I know it. Some exotic ones here. Anyone back here? Person I haven't seen in ages, yeah? No? No, come on, it's a chance, it's for Raj. All right, over here.
I'm Dean Hedstrom. First met Roger in the early to mid 70s. We were mutually building houses about a half-mile apart. And we fell into a pretty good relationship pretty quickly. A couple of engineers, you know, you can't keep them away. We used to do what we would call Saturdaying, which was we'd get together. There's always hardware stores and various places where a couple of guys can go. And I'm sort of maybe the instigator, or Roger is the instigator for me. We were driving back and saw some gliders over Benson Airport. Well, being adventurous souls. Now, at this time, I'm a private pilot and instrument rated, and Roger had really no experience of it at that time. And we went out and took each of us took a little demo ride. Roger, as you know, went along to get not only his glider license, his power license, his instructor's license. I needed like 3 flights and I could get signed off for my glider. I never finished it. Roger kept on going. But it was another one of our just Saturday adventures. We were up flying one night, just, you know, get some airtime, and flying about, we came out of Lake Elmo, and it was probably some snow on the ground, and as we come up towards near our home, I looked down and I said, wow, look at that pool of lake. Roger, it's your house. And he looked at me and said, yeah, look over there, that's your house. We had lit up the whole neighborhood between 2 houses. Not exactly what you'd call dark skies anymore. Remember a lot of good times. From time to time, you saw the video of Jim Wales. Wales would come over from overseas, and somehow he'd always bring a case or so of straight malt whiskey, which we proceeded to enjoy with a relish. It was a lot of fond memories up on the balcony. Sometime later in the late 80s, early 90s, Roger retired from 3M this time, and I needed some help with some management in our engineering company, and Roger joined me there and basically took over all the management of all of our 3M projects, which were pretty extensive at that time, and it was a valuable resource for us to get through a lot of machinery and a lot of equipment. I had the pleasure, because I got busy with other enterprises and things, and hadn't seen Roger for quite some time till Nick and Aaron's wedding, for one thing, and then really had the pleasure this summer that Kim and Roger were in the Grand Marais area later in the summer, and had a chance, and he came by our house, and we sat and we chatted for an hour, hour and a half, enjoyed a couple of beers, and caught up with a lot of things which we hadn't seen for a long time. I was really grateful that he and Kim could make the effort to come and visit us.
I think you're on.
Well, I risk falling to bits coming up here. Roger's propensity and love for speeches, and the fact that he gave a 15-plus minute speech at my wedding, compel me to say a few words. I'd like to thank you all, first of all, for coming to remember my father, Roger Brogren. Speeches have been wonderful. It brings me great joy to hear these accounts of his personality and his character. And I hope that anybody who's a little mic shy, please feel free to shoot us an email or text or whatever it takes, because I know there are hundreds and hundreds of those stories out there. I know Kim and I would love to hear all of them. And the members of my family too. Roger was fun. Roger was opinionated. He was honest. He was capable. He taught me a lot about how to operate in this world. And for that, I'll forever be grateful. For all of his merits and his characteristics, Roger could, of course, be difficult at times, if not downright so. I don't think any account of Roger would be complete without mentioning that. That was also part of his charm. There's no BS approach to living life in his dreams. He made him who he was and the character we all know. The moment my father passed, I noticed that any negative memories or perceptions I had of him immediately began to fade. Now left with a picture of him, all of him. As I knew him my entire life, and as you have all known him through his entire life. So as tough as he was at times, there's no escaping he was a great man. As a son, I can also say he was a great father. Miss you, man. Fair skies and tailwinds.
Thank you, Nick. I think that's what we all needed.
Maybe that's what I needed.
Anyway, thank you all for being here, and I think it meant a lot to Roger in these days, this whole mess that we've been involved with, to know that all of you made the effort to be here, and really appreciate it. Kim, family, everyone else. So, one more thing from Nick.
To that end, and you alluded to it as well, that Roger would like to see us out the other end of this thing. At some point when the weather clears up a bit and it gets warmer, I'm sure you would appreciate a proper send-off, so keep an eye out. And write your contact information down.
Last chance for anyone, otherwise, good evening. Thanks for being here.